for voters to understand the connection between the vote they cast and the impact it will have on representation. The other thing about a single-tier system is that it minimizes the strategic behavior by elites. So it creates, again, simplicity and transparency from the perspective of elites, not just from voters. And it creates a single type of legislator. The mixed systems create two different breeds of legislators, as it were. And some that are elected from districts and run as individual candidates, other ones who are elected from lists. And it's not always clear that those two different types of legislators will respond to the same incentives and will cooperate once they are seated in the legislature. Second thing that the Tunisian election engineers did right is that they chose a list proportional representation system. This system is inclusive of diverse groups. Any group that has substantial popular support can win some representation. And the other thing about this system is that it rewards political elites who seek common ground with each other and form alliances. Unlike the Jordanian system or the Afghan system or the Libyan system of single non-transferable vote, groups that pool together their resources are rewarded in the list proportional representation system. And finally, the third thing, critical thing that I think the electoral designers did right is to choose moderate district magnitudes. And by district magnitude, what I mean is that is the number of seats that is awarded in a given electoral district. And I'm going to show you what the district magnitude structure looks like in a minute. But the critical point is that in Tunisia, almost all legislators are elected from districts that select between 5 and 9 members. What this means is the districts are geographically not large, and that allows for a substantial amount of local geographical representation in Tunisia. And I think that's a good thing. Microphone. I think that's a good thing. I think there's naturally some some community element to representation, and so it's good that Tunisia didn't choose a single nationwide district. The other thing that these relatively small districts do is they encourage coalitions and alliances without the need to impose a legal threshold. For example, that says no party below 5% of the vote nationwide wins any representation, or 7%, or 10% like in Turkey. These relatively small districts effectively impose their own threshold according to how big a share of the vote you can win in the local district. So the last thing that these moderate-sized districts do is ultimately, in the future, if Tunisians decide to adopt this, they would make it possible and make it feasible to have some element of individual preference voting for legislators without the system getting too complicated. Okay, so these are the critical things, I think, that the Tunisian electoral system designers did right. I think there was a large amount of wisdom among those who chose this current electoral system, and they should be applauded for that. I want to talk about an additional element of the system in a minute, and that is the formula. But before I do, I just want to show you, this is a graph that shows the district magnitude structure, as I promised, across the Tunisian districts. And what you can see is there are only a couple of districts, and most of those are for Tunisians voting abroad, that elect, only one district elects 1 member, and a couple elect 2 members, 1 elects 3 members. Almost all the districts are in that middle range. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 districts, 9 seat districts. So most of the electoral competition is in these types of districts in Tunisia. Now what we have is the results of the election in 2011. And what we can see here is, this is just the vote shares that are won by parties that won more than 1/4 of 1% of the vote. Now, in the election in 2011, 560 different lists ran candidates in Tunisia. The vast majority of them do not show up here. The vast majority of those lists won tiny fractions of the vote. But even among the parties that won more than 1/4 of 1% of the vote, you can see the dominant player was Ennahda, and then there was a series of smaller players. And then the distribution gets very small very quickly. In 26 of the parties, of those 560 listed ran seats, 26 won some representation in the assembly. The other 534 won 0 representation. Those 534 listed won no representation. Among them altogether, won 20% of the vote. What does that mean? That means that 20% of the vote was wasted completely. And that means that the parties that did win representation are going to win more than their proportional share of the seats in the assembly. And what I'm going to focus on today is, how was that bonus divided up? How was that extra 20% of the representation divided up? So I'm going to skip in the interest of time, skip through here, and I'm going to talk about my main point, which are the electoral formulas. So there are 2 general families of electoral formulas in proportional representation. The first type is called quota and remainders formulas. And this is the type of system that Tunisia shows. In a quota and remainders formula, what you do in a given district is you first look at all the votes that were cast in the district, and you divide that number by the district magnitude in order to determine what the quota is in a district. Okay? So if the district has 10 seats and 1,000 votes were cast, you divide 1,000 by 10, and the quota is 100. Okay? That's called the Hare quota, and this is the system that Tunisia uses in order to, as a first step in allocating seats in the election. Okay? Now there are other types of quotas that Tunisia could have chosen. It could have decided to divide the total number of votes by the district magnitude plus 1. That's the Droop quota. There are some countries that use that. It could have decided to divide the total number of votes by the district magnitude plus 2. As we increase the size of the denominator, the size of the quota goes down. And so the list price, the full price, or the retail price of buying a seat goes down as well. Okay? I know we're down into some details here, and I want to ask you to stay with me, because this choice is going to determine who wins the majority in the assembly. Okay? So in a quota and remainder system, you first determine the quota, and then every party or list in a district that has won more than a full quota can purchase a seat for that quota. That's the price of the seat, or that's the full price of the seat. But in these systems, you very rarely allocate all the seats at full price. Think about the way that the vote was distributed in Tunisia. There was a huge chunk of the vote that was distributed among lists that won a tiny fraction of the vote. So, after every party that has won full quotas buys the seats at full price, now we move to the reduced price. And we look, after a party wins a seat at quota, you subtract the quota from its total, and we now have a remainder. Okay? When we have no more seats that we can allocate by quota, we give out the seats by remainders. These are the discounted price of seats. This is going to be critical, because in Tunisia's elections in 2011, most of the seats were allocated at a discount price, not at the full price. Okay? Okay. The second main family of formulas that you could use to allocate seats by proportional representation are what are called divisors formulas. They work by a completely different principle, but there are many democracies that use them. The principle is this. First, you calculate a matrix of quotients. Okay? You get those quotients, you get that matrix, by dividing every party's vote total by a series of divisors. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's one option. You could also use 1, then 3, then 5, then 7, or you could use 1, then 4, then 7, and then 10. These are all acceptable formulas, and I'm going to show you an example in a minute. They're going to have a big impact on whether the big party gets rewarded or whether smaller parties get rewarded. Okay? These are critical choices. It's arcane mathematics, it's a little arithmetic, is what it is. But they're really important choices to who wins and who loses. So let me show you some examples. The key thing, though, the key point about these divisor systems is that they do not create a dual pricing system for seats. Okay? If you think about the quotas and remainder systems, big parties are going to purchase most of their seats at full price, and small parties are going to get their seats at discount price. There's two systems. In the devisers formulas, there's no difference between the two. Okay? So let me show you some examples. I hope this will make things more intuitive. Let's imagine that we have a district with 5 seats available. So the district magnitude equals 5. And we've got 4 lists that compete in that district. The first list wins 415 votes. The second list wins 325. The third list wins 185. And the fourth list wins 75 votes. So what are we going to do? In a quota and remainder system, the first step is to calculate the quota. There are 1,000 votes. There are 5 seats. 1,000 divided by 5 equals 200. So the quota equals 200. That's the price of the seat. Okay? Now we look. List A has 2 full quotas. It's got 415 seats. So it's got 2 times 200. It can buy 2 seats at full price. List B can buy 1 seat at full price. And once we've done this, the remainder for list A will be 15, and the remainder for list B will be 125. Now, nobody else has any more full quotas, but we've only sold 3 seats. We have 2 more seats to give. So what do? We look who has the largest remainders. The first largest remainder is C with 185. So C gets 1 seat. The next largest remainder is B with 125. So B gets 1 seat. Now we're done. The total distribution is A2, B2, and C1. Okay? That's a quota and remainder system. If there were 10 seats in the district, we could do this very quickly. The same distribution of votes. Now our quota is 100, not 200, because it's 1,000 divided by 10, not divided by 5. So we do the same exercise. A gets 4 seats, its remainder is 15. B gets 3 seats, its remainder is 25. C gets 1 seat, its remainder is 85. But we've still only given out 8 seats, so we have 2 more to go. C gets 1, and D gets 1. And so we can see the distribution here is 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so now we understand how, this is the Tunisian system, by the way. This is how Tunisia works. Now let's think about the difference between how this works and how things would have worked under a divisor system. Under the divisor system, I said we calculate a matrix of quotients. So we've got our same list of parties and the same distribution of votes. And now we just divide by a series of divisors. 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. And what this matrix is here is those quotients, okay? And now, in a divisor system, if we have 5 seats to give, we simply choose the 5 highest quotients. And here we are. 2 for party A, 2 for party B, and 1 for party C. The result is the same. In this example, the result is the same under the Hare quota and under the divisor system. But it's different when we move to district magnitude equals 10. Now we look at the 10 highest quotients. And now party A, or list A, wins 5 seats. And B wins 3, and C wins 2, and D wins none at all. Now these are both perfectly acceptable formulas for turning votes into seats, but they produce different results. And what I'm going to suggest to you is, even though the results are slightly different in this hypothetical example, in the Tunisian case, the results are dramatically different. And they're dramatically different for 2 reasons. First of all, because the district magnitudes are relatively small in Tunisia. None greater than 10, and most are much smaller than 10. And second of all, because the structure of competition in Tunisia is unique, with one very large party and a large number of very small parties. So, let's look briefly around the world, and we'll look at which countries that use proportional representation use which formulas. What you can see is that Hare quota with largest remainders is the most common formula in the world. So Tunisia is in that column over there with the largest number of other countries. But most countries that use proportional representation use something different. The second largest formula is the divisor system, which I just showed you as an example. Almost as many countries use that as use the quota and remainder system. And then there are countries that use other quotas or other divisors or combinations of the two. So what you can see is there are a lot of democracies out there using all of these different types of systems. Now, would the 2011 outcome have been different had Tunisia chosen a different formula? First of all, the answer is yes, it would have been radically different. Here's how I'm going to answer the question. I am going to rerun the Tunisian election outcome of 2011 using a number of different formulas for converting votes into seats. Okay? What I did is I got the district level data from the independent higher authority of elections. And then I'm going to simulate. I'm going to run simulations of how the outcomes would have differed under different kinds of quota and remainder systems and under 3 different kinds of divisor systems. And I'm going to focus on, the real focus of my attention is going to be on what I call the seat bonus. Okay? That is, what is the difference between the proportion of seats that a party wins and the proportion of votes that the party wins at the national level. And if a party wins more seats than its share of the votes, it gets a bonus. If that number is negative, we can think of that as a penalty. So we have to ask ourselves, can we all really run these simulations and draw any conclusions from them? And the question is, would voters have behaved the same way if a different formula had been in place? And I'm going to suggest that voters would have behaved exactly the same way. I suspect that no voters, or almost no voters, would have been paying attention to the mathematical formula, whether it's a divisor system or a quotient system or a quota and remainder system. The ballot would have looked exactly the same. The ballot that voters used would have looked exactly the same, regardless of which formula we used. What might have differed slightly is the behavior of elites. I don't know whether 560 separate lists would have run in Tunisia if they had been using a divisor system. But I think that from the voters' perspective, we're pretty safe in assuming that they were not paying attention to the difference. Okay, so here's the bottom line. There's a lot of numbers here. You can disregard most of them. I have the parties listed according to the share of the votes that they won at the national level. And you can see the proportion of the votes, or the percentage of the votes that they won in this middle column here. And then each of these columns over here on the right shows the number of seats that the party would have won. In this first column, the HQ column is under the hair quota. That is the result of the elections. That's what Tunisia actually used. If they had used a slightly smaller quotient so that the retail price of the seat went down, they used the Droop quotient, the Droop quota system. Instead of winning 89 seats, Ennahda would have won 97. If they had used a lower quota, Ennahda now would have won 106 seats out of 217. And you can see the distribution is different among other parties as well. If they had used the most common divisor formula, the dot divisor formula, with the exact same distribution of votes in the districts, Ennahda would have won 150 seats out of 217. That's 69% of the seats in the assembly. If they had used different divisor systems like the St. Legué quota, St. Legué divisor, the share of seats that Ennahda would have won would have dropped to 119, but still a majority in the assembly. And if they had used the Wentworth divisor, it would have been 103. So you can see the results are dramatically different had other formulas been used. Let's look at this some other ways. I think it's easier to look at graphs than it is to look at numbers sometimes. So, the blue bars in this graph show the proportion of the national vote that each of the top 26 parties won. The red bars show the results, the share of the votes, the share of the seats that the parties won under the hair quota and remainder system. And you can see that Ennahda won slightly more as a share of seats than its share of votes. It got a bonus of about 4%. But so did many of the smaller parties. Congress for the Republic, Anti-Toll, the Popular Petition, also won bonuses under the current system. If they had used the dot-divisor system, Enada's bonus would have been enormous. And the bonus of all the other parties would have been much, much smaller. So what is really unusual about the Tunisian results in 2011 is this. If you look around the world, and you look at all the different elections around the world, usually the largest bonus goes to the largest party. That's almost always the case. But in Tunisia in 2011, the largest bonus did not go to the largest party. In fact, many of the medium-sized parties won larger bonuses than Ennahda did. Now, how did this happen? So we can see this is another graph that shows the same thing. This shows the difference in the seat bonus for each party between using the hair quota system and using the dot divisor system. And what you see is all the parties that are in green, that are above the 0 mark, won a bigger bonus under hair quota than they did under dot divisor, or they would have under dot divisor. And all the medium-sized parties are in that category. Only Ennahda and the Initiative Party would have won larger bonuses under dot divisor. So, are the differences between formulas always so dramatic? And the answer is no. In most other countries, you would not see this large a difference between the two systems. Generally speaking, the divisor system is favorable to large parties, and the quota and remainder system is favorable to small parties. But in most environments, the difference between these two types of systems is quite modest. So we can look here. Here we have elections from 12 other countries, 4 of which use the hair quota and 8 of which use the dot divisor. And we can plot here the vote share on the x-axis against the size of the seat bonus that a party wins. Okay? And you can see that the relationship in these other countries is very similar across the hair quota systems and the divisor systems. The shape of these distributions are almost identical. So why is Tunisia so different? Let's just look at the Tunisian relationships under each of the 6 different formulas that I checked. The first one is the one that Tunisia actually uses. That's the relationship between vote share and your seat bonus under the hair quota system. And this bottom one here on the left is the relationship under the dot divisor system. What you see down below is the largest party gets by far a larger bonus than the other parties. And in the top system, the smaller parties get as large or a larger bonus than the big party. Okay? Why was it exceptional? First of all, it was exceptional because the vast majority of seats are allocated in these medium-sized districts. I think that's a good thing. I think that district structure is outstanding, was a very good choice of the electoral system designers. But the second key factor is the structure of competition in Tunisia, with one very large party and a large number of smaller parties. Okay? The result is, or the effect of this is that Ennahda paid full price for almost all of its seats. And the other parties almost never paid full price for any of their seats. Okay? So we can look at this here. This shows us, and we really want to focus only on these middle 2 columns. You can look at Ennahda, of the 89 seats that it won. There's a mistake there, it should be 27 in the second column. Of the 89 seats that it won, it paid full price for 62 of them. And it won only 27 of them by remainders. If you look at all the other parties put together, they almost never won any seats by paying full price. They won almost all their seats at remainders. This shows this a little bit more clearly. Ennahda is the blue, and we're only going to look at the 2 columns on the left. Ennahda is in blue, and the other parties are in red. Ennahda won twice as many seats at full price as at discount price, whereas the other parties paid full price for almost none of their seats. Okay? So the question then is, what will happen next? Okay? And whatever the next election is, the structure of competition probably will not be as fragmented as it was in 2011. It's almost certain that there will not be 560 lists running in the election. It's likely, I would predict, that the distribution of votes across the non-Islamist parties will be less fragmented than it was in 2011. But nevertheless, I think it's quite likely that Ennahda will be far larger than any of its main competitors. Okay? So, what does this mean for the incentives of politicians? It means the current formula creates incentives for small alliances or parties to compete for remainder seats, not for full quotas, because they can buy seats more cheaply. They can buy them at a discount at remainders. So if you keep the current system, it may well be that small parties do well, but it will also mean that small parties will not face a strong incentive to coalesce. Maybe that's okay, maybe that's not okay. That's for Tunisians to decide. But in many other systems, in many other countries, electoral systems are engineered in order to create an incentive for like-minded groups to coalesce into broad alliances. The goal there is for them to be able to articulate a feasible, realistic governing vision and to establish themselves as a viable opposition to whatever the governing party is. The Tunisian system, the way it's set up, will not create that incentive because smaller parties can much more effectively convert their vote support into representation by remaining separate and more effective than if they pooled their votes together. Now, divisor formulas, if we look at the non-divisor formula, has its own set of problems because it creates such a reward for large parties. We saw in our simulation, it would have created a supermajority for Ennahda in the current Constituent Assembly, even based on about 40% of the vote. That's probably not advisable either. But had I had more time, I would have been able to show you there are a large number of different divisor formulas that you could choose among. Many of the divisor formulas are friendlier to smaller groups than the dot divisor formula. They all are, actually. And so the possibility is out there to adjust the divisor formula so that it will be more inclusive than a dot divisor would be. And yet at the same time, it wouldn't create this two-tiered market for seats. It wouldn't create a full price and a discount price for seats that create these incentives for small parties not to coalesce. So I think the engineers for the next Tunisian election law have a lot of important decisions to make. I think the track record so far is outstanding. So if we look across all of the Arab Spring countries, the Tunisian electoral engineers did by far the best job of any of those that were designing new electoral systems. But there are more important choices to come. And those choices may very well determine who wins and who loses in the next election. So I would advise you to take those choices very carefully. Thank you.